Imagine an army so terrifying that entire cities committed mass suicide rather than fall into its hands. This was no fantasy. It was the reality of Genghis Khan's reign of terror that changed the map of the world forever. In this video, we show you 10 of the most brutal tactics the Mongol conqueror used to spread fear and terror. Some of them are so shocking that historians still can't believe they actually happened. Number 10. The destruction of Nishapur. Imagine a city that was literally wiped off the map in a single day. Once a thriving center of trade and culture, Persian Nishapur fell victim to Genghis Khan's merciless wrath in 1221. Why? It all started quite benignly, during a trade dispute between Mongol merchants and local authorities. When Governor Inalchuk ordered the execution of Genghis Khan's son-in-law, he signed a death warrant not only for himself, but for the entire city. The Mongolian response was swift and terrifying. Genghis Khan sent an army with orders that allowed no exceptions. Every living being in Nishapur must die. His troops advanced with frightening methodicalness, systematically searching every building, every house, every corner of the city. Neither pleas for mercy nor attempts to surrender stopped the Mongols. Their advance was as ruthless and precise as a well-tuned killing machine. The way the city was destroyed shows Genghis Khan's tactical genius. First, the Mongols surrounded Nishapur so that no one could escape. Then they launched a coordinated attack, using siege engines and catapults to breach the city walls. What followed was a systematic massacre in which neither children, nor the elderly, nor even domestic animals were spared. What made the tragedy even more horrific was the ritual that followed. According to contemporary chroniclers' accounts, Genghis Khan ordered that all the victims be beheaded. These heads were then used to build pyramids outside the city walls, a terrifying monument and a warning to anyone who would consider resisting Mongol power. News of Nishapur's fate spread like wildfire and caused panic throughout the region. For Genghis Khan, this was not just an act of revenge, but a premeditated psychological war. The message was clear: surrender or suffer the same fate. Many cities in Persia chose the first option, opening their gates to Mongol troops and hoping for mercy. Number 9. The filling of Urgench. While some cities quickly surrendered after news of Nishapur's fate, Urgench stood up to Mongol power and paid a price that surpassed all previous massacres. As the pearl of the Silk Road and a center of wealth and culture, Urgench was too valuable a target for Genghis Khan to bypass. Unlike his usual style of blitzkrieg warfare, Genghis Khan was forced to besiege Urgench for several long months. This deviation from his normal strategy shows how fiercely the city's inhabitants fought back. The Mongol troops, used to quick victories, had to show unexpected patience this time. When the city walls were finally breached, all hell broke loose, surpassing even the worst nightmares. Genghis Khan, enraged by the long resistance, ordered the complete extermination of the population. To ensure that his orders were strictly carried out, he instituted a macabre competition among his soldiers. Each warrior had to bring a set number of severed heads as proof of his success in the massacre. The city's canals were literally clogged with the bodies of slain citizens. As historical sources describe, piles of skulls were erected all over the city as grim proof of Khan's victory. This horrific display served as a warning to all who would dare to stand up to the Mongol Empire. But Genghis Khan's brutality did not end with immediate violence. With cold calculation, he ordered the systematic destruction of the elaborate irrigation system around Urgench. Once fertile land was turned into wasteland, life-giving canals were blocked, and fields were salinated to prevent future cultivation. This deliberate destruction of infrastructure has had long-lasting consequences, with famines and disease affecting the region and killing hundreds of thousands more. Number 8. Decimation of the Khwarezm Empire. You may have thought that the Khwarezm civilization fell because of the vast military superiority of the Mongols, but imagine that this entire disaster began with a single diplomatic misunderstanding. Genghis Khan originally sent a caravan of 500 men to the mighty Khwarezm Empire. It was not a military attack. It was a trade and diplomatic mission to establish friendly relations and open new trade routes. But Shah Muhammad II made a fatal mistake that changed the history of Central Asia forever. Under the influence of his advisors, he branded the Mongol envoys as spies and ordered their execution in the city of Otrar. Little did he know that he had just signed the death warrant for his own empire. Genghis Khan, enraged by this insult, vowed revenge on a scale the world had never seen before. The Mongol ruler assembled a vast army of 200,000 warriors, the best horsemen and archers of his time. First up, of course, was the city of Otrar, where his envoys were massacred. After capturing the city, the governor of Inalchuk faced a terrifying punishment. Genghis Khan ordered molten silver to be poured into his eyes and ears. It was a harsh but clear message to anyone who dared to resist. The Mongol war machine then rolled through the Khwarezm Empire like a relentless storm. Famous cities such as Bukhara and Samarkand were conquered and razed to the ground. The invaders not only killed thousands of civilians, but also deliberately destroyed cultural heritage, burning libraries, destroying mosques, and erasing the traces of a once advanced civilization. Most frightening was the methodical nature of this attack. The Mongol forces split into smaller groups and systematically cleansed entire areas, leaving no survivors to rise up against the new domination. River waters throughout the region were reportedly red with blood, as contemporary records attest. Number 7. Use of human shields. The methodically executed destruction was only the beginning of Genghis Khan's horror. Imagine that the worst suffering was experienced by those who survived the first wave of attacks. How would you feel if, after surviving a Mongol raid, you were forced to march as a human shield against your own city and people? The Mongols used the survivors of the conquered settlements in a way that was as effective as it was terrifying. They systematically placed the captives in the front lines of their attack formations. These unfortunates, often wounded and exhausted, were forced to absorb the first volleys of arrows and stones from their own countrymen. This tactic worked on two levels. Physically, it protected precious Mongol soldiers from casualties, but its main effect was psychological. Think of a city defender who suddenly recognizes his brother, son, or neighbor in the front line of the enemy army. Such a situation completely paralyzed the defensive capabilities. In the conquest of Nishapur, this method was used with frightening effectiveness. Thousands of prisoners had to march against the city walls as the first wave of the attack. The defenders faced an impossible choice, either to shoot and kill their own people, or to lay down their arms and face certain death under the Mongol sabers. Many soldiers simply refused to shoot. Others, paralyzed by terror and confusion, were unable to fight effectively. This gave the Mongols a decisive advantage. Their real warriors could reach the city walls with minimal casualties. The most frightening aspect of this strategy was its knock-on effect. After capturing one city, the survivors were immediately used as human shields when attacking the next settlement. The inhabitants were thus forced to participate in the destruction of their neighbors, friends, and relatives. This practice allowed the Mongols to spread fear and destruction throughout the region with minimal resistance. Number 6. Brutality against the Jin dynasty. While the use of human shields was terrifying, Genghis Khan's longest and most elaborate plan of brutality was yet to come. China's Jin dynasty was about to be destroyed so systematically that it would change the demographics of the entire nation. Imagine an empire where 6 out of 10 people you knew disappeared in a single generation. When the Mongols launched their assault against the Jin dynasty in 1211, no one expected the invasion to turn into a nightmare that lasted nearly a quarter of a century. Unlike the lightning attacks Genghis Khan had waged in Persia, he chose a different strategy for China, a slow, ruthless extermination operation. The siege of Zhongdu, today's Beijing, in 1215 showed the true extent of Mongol cruelty. After 1 year of siege, the city fell and the Mongols raised hell. Entire districts were systematically plundered, buildings set on fire, and inhabitants slaughtered in numbers that are hard to imagine today. Palace after palace, temple after temple. Everything that represented the cultural wealth of the Jin dynasty was either destroyed or looted. But Genghis Khan did not turn his attention to destruction alone. With cold calculation, he ordered the capture of the most talented craftsmen, artists, and scholars. Thousands of these people were forcibly taken to Mongolia, where they were forced to serve their new masters. This deliberate strategy not only deprived the Jin dynasty of its most valuable human resources, but also strengthened the Mongol Empire with new knowledge and skills. Every region, every city that fell under Mongol rule witnessed a similar fate. Libraries full of precious manuscripts were burned, irrigation systems destroyed, and fields salted so that nothing would ever grow on them again. This wasn't just a turf war. It was an attempt to wipe out an entire civilization. Number 5. Biological warfare at the Siege of Kaffa. The Mongol tactic of destroying civilizations took on a whole new dimension in 1346, when the bubonic plague began to mow down Mongol soldiers besieging the port of Kaffa. Their commanders decided to do something that would change the history of Europe forever. Could they have known that their improvised biological weapon would eventually kill 50 million people? Imagine the situation. The Mongol army is besieging the Genoese trading colony of Kaffa in the Crimea. Everything is going according to plan until a deadly disease begins to spread in the camp. Soldiers are dying by the hundreds, and a normal commander would probably consider retreating. But the Mongol generals instead come up with a terrifying idea. Why not use this disaster as a weapon? So they began loading the bodies of their fallen, infected soldiers onto catapults and firing them over the city walls. The streets and squares of Kaffa were soon filled with decomposing corpses. The defenders were forced to deal with them somehow, but in handling the bodies, they themselves became infected. Panic broke out in Kaffa. People were dying by the hundreds, and the Genoese merchants knew they had to act immediately. They boarded their merchant ships and fled to safety, or so they thought. They had unwittingly become carriers of a deadly disease. When they arrived in Italian ports, they brought with them something far worse than news of Mongol cruelty. The plague began to spread through Europe with incredible speed, from Italy to France, from France to England, from the ports to the interior. Within a few years, about a third of the European population had died. Towns, villages, and monasteries were decimated. People were dying so fast that it was impossible to bury them all. Ironically, the Mongols caused far more death by their defeat than by their victory. Their improvised biological weapon killed more people than all their military campaigns combined. Number 4. Genocide of the Karaite. Long before the Mongols used plague as a weapon, Genghis Khan had perfected another, much more personal method of extermination: total genocide. In 1203, he made the Karaite tribe a deterrent example to show all Mongol tribes that treason was unforgivable, and that his revenge meant not just the death of individuals, but the erasure of an entire culture from history. It may surprise you to know that the Karaite tribe was not Genghis Khan's enemy from the beginning. On the contrary, their leader Togrul, also known as Wang Khan, was once Genghis Khan's adoptive father and key ally. It was he who helped the young Temujin, as Genghis Khan was originally called, gain his first successes on the road to power. But as Genghis Khan's power and popularity grew, Togrul began to see his adopted son as a threat. In the fateful year 1203, Togrul allied himself with Genghis Khan's enemies. For the Mongol leader, this was the highest form of betrayal by the man he considered a father. Retribution was swift and absolute. Genghis Khan's warriors, masters of swift attacks and archery from horseback, completely crushed the Karaite forces. What followed, however, went beyond the ordinary atrocities of war. It was a systematic attempt to wipe out the existence of an entire nation. All men capable of fighting were killed without mercy. Women and children were divided among the Mongol soldiers as slaves and servants. But Genghis Khan went even further. He banned the use of Karaite names, forcibly suppressed their customs and traditions, and divided their territory among the loyal Mongol tribes. Within just a few generations, the Karaite identity virtually ceased to exist. This was one of the first recorded cultural genocides in history. It was not just the killing of a people, but the systematic erasure of their memory, traditions, and cultural heritage. Number 3, methods of execution. While the Genghis Karaite tribe was erased from history as a whole by Genghis Khan, their methods of individual execution were even more horrific works of terror. Can you imagine the sound molten silver makes when it is poured into the human ear? For Genghis Khan, execution was not just the end of a life, but a spectacular spectacle designed to strike fear into the hearts of all who would dare to resist. One of the cruelest methods he often used was the so-called breaking in the round. The convict was firmly chained to a large wooden stake, and his limbs were systematically broken with an iron bar or hammer. After this torturous procedure, the wheel was erected on a stake, where the unfortunate man was left to a slow and agonizing death caused by shock, dehydration, or exposure to adverse conditions. This public spectacle acted as a powerful warning and a visible reminder of the harsh consequences of disobeying Genghis Khan's authority. These brutal executions had the dual purpose of deterrence and retribution. They acted as a powerful deterrent, striking fear into the hearts of those who might consider resisting the Mongol ruler. The public nature of these executions ensured that the gruesome details would spread quickly and discourage any thoughts of rebellion. At the same time, these methods served as a means of retribution, allowing Genghis Khan to take revenge on those who had offended him or his empire. The punishments corresponded to the severity of the offense and clearly showed who held the power. Executions had a strong psychological impact and created an environment where absolute obedience was necessary to survive. This show of force was not haphazard. It was a deliberate strategy to sow terror among potential enemies. Genghis Khan knew that his reputation was as potent a weapon as his army. Cities that heard of these spectacular punishments often surrendered without a fight, knowing that defiance would lead to untold suffering not only for the soldiers, but for the entire community. Number 2, the destruction of Herat. At a time when Genghis Khan's name carried like a terrifying echo across Central Asia, not all cities chose the path of immediate surrender. Herat, the beautiful pearl of Central Asia, chose to defy the Mongol army for 6 whole months, and the price it paid for its courage surpassed even the darkest nightmares of its inhabitants. While some cities opened their gates after the first shots were fired, the governor of Herat, Shams Aline-Kart, made a fateful decision. Against all expectations, he had the city gates closed and prepared his people to defend themselves. No one could have guessed that this decision would turn a thriving cultural capital into a desolate landscape of death. The 6-month siege was unusual for Genghis Khan. A man who usually conquered cities in a matter of days was forced to wait patiently. With each day that Herat resisted, the Mongol conquerors' anger grew. A city with a rich tradition of art, learning, and culture fought back bravely despite growing desperation. When the Mongol arrows and catapults finally broke through the walls, a retaliation so terrible that even veterans of the Mongol army were taken aback by its scale followed. The soldiers were given a single task: to wipe out every trace of life from the face of the earth. House by house, street by street, they swept through the city, leaving behind only empty shells of once vibrant life. In just 1 week, more than 1.6 million people died, a number we can hardly imagine today. Rivers ran red with blood, while once majestic buildings lay in ruins. It wasn't just a slaughter of people, it was an attack on civilization itself. Libraries containing valuable manuscripts went up in flames. Majestic mosques were razed to the ground, and the sophisticated irrigation systems that had sustained life in the area for centuries were systematically destroyed. Number 1, forced migration and slavery. While the blood of the victims of Genghis Khan's massacres has long since soaked into the land, there is one aspect of his brutality that has left its mark on the DNA of millions of people living today. Those who were not killed often faced a fate that made some wish they had rather died under Mongol sabers. When the Mongol army abandoned conquered cities, it left behind more than just rubble. Thousands of people were forcibly torn from their homes and forced to march hundreds of miles away, under the watchful eye of Mongol soldiers who ensured that no one escaped. These population movements were carefully organized. It was not a chaotic flight, but a systematic process of redistributing people according to their usefulness to the empire. Artisans and artists were particularly valuable. Potters, blacksmiths, weapons makers, and other skilled workers were separated from their families and sent to Mongolia, where they had to pass on their knowledge to nomadic people who had not previously possessed these skills. Their hands, which had once created beauty for their own people, now had to serve those who had destroyed their homes. Even more terrifying was the fate of the children, especially the boys. These were often taken from their families and systematically trained as soldiers. Imagine a child who had seen the slaughter of his town and was now forced to become part of the same army that had killed his parents and siblings. These children were remade in the image of their captors, learning the Mongolian language, adopting Mongolian customs, and forgetting their original culture. Captured enemy soldiers faced a different but no less cruel fate. They were either enslaved as labor or, perhaps worse, used as so-called food for the swords in other military campaigns. The Mongols put them in the front lines, where they served as human shields for the Mongol archers or as the first wave to attack fortified cities. Incredibly, Genghis Khan created the largest contiguous empire in history. It stretched from East Asia to Eastern Europe, encompassing the territory of present-day China, Mongolia, Russia, Korea, and many other countries in Central Asia and the Middle East. The size of this empire is so vast that it is hard to imagine today. Because of its size, the Mongol Empire enabled trade and cultural exchange to spread across Eurasia on an unprecedented scale. But there was a dark side to this expansion. The Mongol conquest of territory was often accompanied by brutal military campaigns and mass violence that left deep scars on the history of the conquered peoples. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to watch other videos we have made for you, click on one of them on the screen or check out the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.